Welcome to the Calm Analytics channel. I'm Boris Tessenghausen. May 25th, here are the main news stories at this moment. And let's start with this piece of news. Remember, not so long ago, Putin and his ghouls were talking about a sanitary zone that needed to be created in Ukraine. The logic is absolutely incomprehensible. They had this idea, just like now, supposedly to push 20 kilometers from the border, move the Ukrainian troops back so that no one can strike Russian territory. But now Ukrainian drones are flying as far as 2,000 kilometers. So why they were talking about 20 kilometers is completely unclear. But that's not what I'm talking about. The Ukrainian military interpreted this information in their own way and are creating a security zone, but deep inside the Russian Federation and deep into the occupied territories. Azov is already patrolling the border area around Mariupol. Already. Pilots of Azov's First Corps are already carrying out missions to strike targets near the Russian border. I'll show you a video now, combat operations on the highways, Mariupol-Taganrog and Mariupol-Volnovakha. Please take a look.
Повітряна тривога, лети до Таганрога, дістань до Волгограда, Саратов потруси, нехай гримить в Тамбові, Рязані та Ростові, як до Москви дістанешся, то нахуй рознеси. Дехто каже, що це гріх і так не треба, гнів та розпач можуть карму зіпсувати. Бачу сльози, чути стогін аж до неба. За це все капи мають поздихать. Повітряна тривога, лети до Таганрога, влупи як слід Вороніж і Курськом закуси. Є Лабугу поштрикай, Новгород великий, як до Москви дістанешся, то нахуй рознеси.
There is no longer any safe place for the occupier near Azov. Take that, Putin. And sign for it. You wanted a security zone. Now you're getting it deep inside. By the way, the M14 highway from Rostov-on-Don to Crimea along the Sea of Azov has already been closed to civilians. I talked about this in the previous episode, while Putin is being told that in a month they've captured some village with a population of 3 people. Ukrainian drones are taking control over hundreds of square kilometers of territory. But the dim-witted, Botoxed KGB man is being handed pretty slides with pictures showing him about to defeat Ukraine. Here's another absolutely wonderful piece of news. The retreat of Russian assault groups from Mala Tokmachka has begun. Z channels are reporting this. This is truly epic news, just incredible. Let me remind you, Mala Tokmachka is a legendary settlement that the Russians have been unable to capture for 4 years now. They keep saying, just a little more, almost there, but it never happens. Basically, Mala Tokmachka has already become a meme. Actually, for the Russians, this isn't called a retreat. In other words, it's a negative advance. Everything is going according to their plan. By the way, without even looking, I can guess what they're going to say about Mala Tokmachka on Russian TV channels right now. That it's a gesture of goodwill to continue negotiations. Or that there are no more Russians there, so we don't need Mala Tokmachka anymore. Or that Putin was asked to withdraw the troops, Macron called, Trump called, this needs to be emphasized. They were tricked, deceived, and so on. And then the withered, bald guy will say that they're doing it out of pity. For the population, there's simply no one left in Mala Tokmachka anymore. Take your pick, any of these options. They'll cover up the retreat with any of these explanations. By the way, I still haven't heard a clear explanation from any of the fans of the Russian world. If they're supposedly winning everywhere all the time, then why did they run from Kherson? Why were Russian troops driven out of there in disgrace? Did Macron call back then too and ask them to withdraw the troops? Or is there some other explanation? By the way, friends, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. It's important, and you can do it right now. Let me remind you, we are fighting Putin's propaganda here, so let's do it together. And let there be more people on the bright side. So make sure to subscribe. I came across another piece of news. It's very interesting, but it's bordering on something mystical. When it comes to Russian propagandists, it's practically a ready-made script for another installment of the Final Destination movie. Remember that movie where no matter what, you just couldn't cheat death? The characters in that film, by the way, I thought that after watching it myself, I think a lot of people probably travel around feeling tense after that. Now, if anyone is driving on the highway behind those logging trucks carrying huge logs, that's all after watching Final Destination, but let's call our story Destination Z. This is a story about Russian propagandists. Russian propagandist Anna Zakarian came to occupied Russia, South Ossetia, to show her film about the so-called Special Military Operation Heroes. The film has a very pretentious title, Towards Truth and Justice. The screenings took place in Tskhinvali, the capital of the unrecognized South Ossetia, which, let me remind you, has been under effective Russian occupation since the 2008 war. The film is dedicated to local residents who went for money to fight against Ukraine. It's, in other words, classic Russian military propaganda, glorification of war, stories about fighting Nazism, the Russian world, all that stuff. Absolutely low-grade propaganda. But then the real horror begins. After all these events and the film screening, Zakarian goes to relax with a group of friends. They climbed onto a bridge over a mountain river and started rocking it. Zakarian fell into the river and the current carried her away somewhere. The raging river carried her as far as 35 kilometers from where she fell. 3 days later, naturally, she was found dead. When this became known, it turned out that Zakarian's married name was Tits. Her husband is Jerzy Tits, a Pole. He was a very well-known pro-Russian activist in Poland. This character spent many years promoting Russian narratives and participated in various pro-Russian actions in Poland. But in 2018, the Polish authorities detained him and expelled him from the country. He was charged with offenses related to espionage and activities in the interests of Russia. And then this Polish friend of the Russian world went to fight for Russia against Ukraine. In the end, he died ingloriously in the war. So first he kicked the bucket, and then his wife, who was also a propagandist, did too. It turns out to be a surreal story. The husband, a Pole and admirer of the Russian world, goes to fight against Ukraine and dies ingloriously in the occupied territory. And the wife, a propagandist as well. On the Russian-occupied territory, she takes her own life. It turns out to be a perfect plot for a movie called Final Destination Z. See the Russian world and die. And one more piece of news. After yet another round of attacks from Russia towards Armenia, from Lavrov, from Russian propagandists, there was an absolutely concise, predictable, and correct response. The Speaker of the Armenian Parliament, Alan Simonian, posted a screenshot from the show. It was from propagandist Solovyov's show, where they were talking about Armenia, calling the Armenian leaders all sorts of bad names and so on. So, the Speaker of the Parliament posted the screenshot and wrote, "Truly fantastic beasts." And let me remind you that Armenia chose its own path without asking Russia. Putin decided to take revenge for this, delivering a truly severe blow. He banned the import of flowers and fruits from Armenia to Russia. A petty, botoxed meanness. Well, and also Solovyov made an unexpected statement on his show saying that Russia no longer needs Odessa, apparently because, I quote, "there are no Russians left there." What happened? And why did the rhetoric change so suddenly? Remember, Putin used to say that Odessa is a Russian city, but now it turns out everything is different. So apparently a new set of talking points has come from the Kremlin. Stick to statements about Donbass, and as for the completely unrealistic goals of this war, shut the black propaganda mouths. See what kind of argument they've come up with? There are no more Russians there, so there's no one left to save. Absolutely insane, absolutely. But Solovyov is wrong. There are still plenty of Russians in Ukraine. It's just that they no longer need to be saved. They died in the Ukrainian steppes. They're lying there, some whole, some in pieces. Meanwhile, Ukraine and Ukrainians are showing the whole world true heroism, which will go down in all the history books. In every episode, we have an important fundraiser for Ukraine's defense forces. Today, we begin training for soldiers of the 1st Artillery Battery, Artillery Division of the 101st Separate Brigade. We are collecting by car. Our artillerymen are giving the enemy so much damage it's a real pain. But they really need transport now. They are fighting in one of the hottest areas. Konstantinovka, Drushkovka. Let's help our fighters. I've spoken with them. They are the most modest people, truly humble, but they know their job well. The link to donate for our artillerymen is in the description of this video. There is also a monobank, private bank, and PayPal for those who want to help from abroad. And there's a QR code as well. If you're watching on another channel, it always leads to the donation page too. And in every episode, I want to thank you separately for helping our fighters, because believe me, our support is very much needed right now. Together we are a great force, a truly great force. But in general, of course, Putin's logic, this underground henpecked man, is very interesting. In order to save Russians in Ukraine, you have to kill Russians from Russia. And you also have to kill those so-called Russians they're supposedly saving in Ukraine. So basically, according to Putin, you just need to kill all Russians. In short, Putin is solving the problem of Russians in Ukraine in a radical way. No Russians, no problem. The chief disposer of Russians. You really have to hate your own people to destroy them by the hundreds of thousands like that. And yet for this, they hang portraits of Putin in their homes. In the end, they found each other, Russians and Putin. And here's a wonderful story about traditional values. Just fasten your seatbelts. This is the gem of today's episode. Our favorite segment, the Russian Orthodox Church hits rock bottom. That is, they're trying to find their way home, down to the underworld. In the Czech Republic, Arok Metropolitan Ilarion was detained. 4 small containers with a white substance were found in his car. Interesting. In the Czech city of Karlovy Vary, the former head of the Department for External Church Relations, Metropolitan Ilarion, known in secular life as Alfeyev, was detained. The Post states that on May 24th, after leaving the church in Karlovy Vary, the police stopped his car. He was there, his cameraman was nearby, and in the trunk they found 4 small containers with a white substance. And he didn't say on the spot that it was manna from heaven. In other words, the Metropolitan didn't offer such an explanation, or say something like, "I'm carrying flour to bake bread and feed the poor." Metropolitan Ilarion, of course, immediately denied any involvement in storing prohibited substances. That is, he hadn't even been told yet that it was prohibited. He says, "Those prohibited substances are not mine. I have never had and do not have any connection to the illegal trafficking of narcotic substances. For me, as a clergyman, even the very suggestion of such a thing is, of course, false," stated Metropolitan Ilarion. What a surprise this is. But you know, what's interesting is the figure of this Metropolitan himself. He is simply the embodiment of spiritual bonds and traditional values. So this Metropolitan Ilarion has been the chairman of the Department for External Church Relations of the Moscow Patriarchate since 2009. One of the most influential figures in the Russian Orthodox Church. He was even called a possible successor to Patriarch Kirill. Just imagine the level. In June 2022, he was unexpectedly removed from all key positions and sent to head the small Budapest Hungarian diocese. In church circles, this was perceived as a de facto exile and a sharp demotion. No official reasons were given, and later it became known that he had also obtained Hungarian citizenship and purchased an expensive estate near Budapest. But that's not all. In 2024, his former cell attendant, Georgi Suzuki, publicly accused Ilarion of harassment and psychological pressure. It was a major scandal. Remember? Audio recordings and photographs were published. That is, he was only able to do this after he escaped from Metropolitan Ilarion. And after the scandal in the summer of 2024, Ilarion was removed from managing the diocese. Well, de facto, it turns out they admitted guilt. His church career was practically destroyed after that. And now there are also 4 containers with the substance. From metropolitan to drug dealer, as they say, it's just one step. Truly a model of traditional values. He could be heading the Russian Orthodox Church right now. Here's another piece of news about cynical scoundrels. Russia has appealed to the International Court of Justice with a complaint about the infringement of the rights of Russians in the Baltic countries, the Russian Foreign Ministry reported today. Nowhere are Russians oppressed more than in Russia itself. I'll go further. In Russia, Putin is simply destroying them even. Russia is just some kind of reserve for the oppressed. Moreover, all of them are being oppressed by Putin himself, a former oppressed man who used to carry suitcases for the former mayor of St. Petersburg, a faceless and vindictive moth. There are no harsher masters than former slaves. This describes Putin exactly. With this statement, Russia is building a kind of legal framework for the concept of protecting compatriots, the very doctrine they already applied in Georgia in 2008 and in Ukraine. The logic is very simple. First, you document the fact of discrimination through international bodies, creating a kind of paper trail, and then you refer to that trail. As the basis for forced protective measures? Well, it's clear that Russia files lawsuits not to win them, but so that the case itself exists. So that they can say, we tried to resolve things peacefully, you see, we even filed lawsuits. So this protocol, a record of previous peaceful attempts, is a mandatory element in the architecture of future aggression, of possible future aggression. The main thing is that all the other members of the North Atlantic Alliance understand this, although, in my opinion, the most favorable moment for an attack on NATO countries, Putin has already missed it. That was during the first 6 months after the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, when European leaders were confused. Russia still had a fairly powerful military potential, and the navy was still intact. No one knew how Putin would act next. At that time, European leaders were genuinely frightened. Not all of them, of course. Credit where credit is due, the Baltic countries almost immediately got involved in helping Ukraine, and the statements coming from Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia were always as tough as possible toward the Russian Federation. Taking this opportunity, I want to express my deep gratitude for that. But now, for Putin, the moment has been missed. The Russian economy is on the verge of plunging into the abyss. The front is at a stalemate, and Ukraine has ramped up its own production of strike systems, with active assistance, by the way, from Western partners. And in general, if things keep going this way, sooner or later, Ukraine will drive Putin and all his replicas back behind the Urals. That's why it seems to me all these scare tactics right now are just scare tactics born out of hopelessness, out of a kind of desperation. People are paying less and less attention to Putin's threats. Even Putin and Lukashenko's recent joint exercises didn't impress anyone at all. Even though these two old outcasts tried to stir up fear like, oh, here we go, nuclear exercises, all of it looked very pathetic. After that, they just chatted over video call, cooing at each other. And that was it. Another piece of news. The ideologue, the chief ideologue of the Russian world, Dugin, has revealed some more Russian secrets. So the chief ideologue of the Russian world, Dugin, suggested giving Russians internet access according to a schedule or as a reward for good behavior. See how generous he is? So do you know what secret he revealed? It turns out, if Russians can be given internet access for good behavior, then it means the internet isn't being shut off because of drones, if they can turn it on for good behavior and turn it off. What a revelation. I think soon they'll be giving Russians data traffic in exchange for mandatory downloading of the Max Messenger. By the way, there's already a whole forum about this, and now people just have 2 phones for it. They buy 2 phones. On one they install Max but don't use it, and on the other they do everything else. The Oreshnik strike on Bila Tserkva didn't scare anyone in Ukraine. You know who was most outraged by this strike? You won't believe it. Russian war correspondents. Several top Russian war correspondents or Russian telegram channels have expressed their opinions about this strike, and it's really not in favor of the Russian Federation at all. It's just expensive hardware buried in the ground. The strike of retribution, as it was called in Russia, simply enraged some bloggers. Let me quote some of them. A strike in which kinetic dummies were used instead of warheads carries more of a psychological effect, which naturally, each time it's getting lower and lower. Writes a top Russian channel. The target in Oreshnik was not any kind of strategic or even symbolic object, notes the channel of the second major. The military pointlessness of the strike no longer inspires the uplifting mood of the first Oreshnik. Many people had different expectations. Here's another quote. It's just insanely expensive hardware buried in the ground for the sake of a pretty picture that no one believes in anymore except pensioners. Wow, that's something. Basically, all of this is just for the grandmas watching TV. In reality, the effect is zero, and so on. I wonder what they reported to Putin after this Oreshnik strike, when tens of millions of dollars were just thrown in the trash. That all Ukrainians got scared and now will never ever strike Russia again? or that the ghouls at the front won't get beaten anymore. And then suddenly there's another massive strike on Moscow. And once again, Putin's ports and oil depots are burning. They keep bringing him this Putin who, let me remind you, doesn't use the internet, some folders all the time. He reads cards in some 500th font size. In other words, he lives in his own cocoon. And this cocoon is formed around him by a handful of people. I think they're constantly reporting to him that the front is about to collapse any moment now. Oreshnik, something happened there. Everyone there just got scared. The Ukrainians have nothing left to fight with. Now we'll take Kyiv, now we'll capture Donbas. You really have to be either very gullible or very stupid to believe Gerasimov for the 100th time. Well, or maybe both. And then, once again, he gets fooled, he'll remove Gerasimov, throw him in jail somewhere, and then someone new will come along to lay out these cards for him again. Until someone from his own circle gives Putin a good whack on the head from behind with a snuff box. Well, take care of yourselves, take care of your loved ones, subscribe to the channel, don't forget. And I really ask you, let's help our artillerymen. The link to the fundraiser is in the description of this video. These are the kind of guys our artillerymen are. Have a peaceful day, everyone, and glory to Ukraine.